It's hot out here, but it's not as hot as Arizona. Have you ever been to Arizona? It is so hot in Arizona. You like it? Yeah. I am okay with heat in little bits, not so much, like all the time. I don't know how Arizonians do it. I think it makes them angry. Because I was there 3 years ago in Arizona. I was visiting my stepdad, who I hadn't seen in almost 20 years. And on the way back, we were driving on the highway. And on the interstate in Arizona, in one place, it's 75 miles per hour. Then for 100 feet, it's 45. Then it's 75 again. Most people catch this. I am not most people. So I'm driving on the highway, and all of a sudden, there's lights behind me. Well, this is odd, I thought. I'm going 76. This should not be a problem. I get pulled over. The cops who pull me over, they don't seem to care much for me. They pull me out of the car. Well, they ask me out of the car. They search me. They search the car. They're not nice. And they leave me with a $600 speeding ticket. Whew. I was upset. It had been a great trip up until then. On the way out of Arizona, I was feeling good. I was singing songs. My kids were there. My sister was there. Her girlfriend was there. We were having a great time. The rest of the trip, this was 45 minutes into the trip. The rest of the 12 hours are miserable. I was so mad at the police. I was mad at the stop sign. I was mad at the highway. But the person I was the most mad at was me. How did I miss that sign? It was clearly posted, suspiciously smaller than the other signs, but clearly posted. And I struggled to find it within my heart to turn my attitude around and be okay with the situation. I had the $600, I guess, somewhere. It'd be okay. Long after I paid off that $600 ticket, I was still mad. It wasn't okay. According to Arizona, it was okay. Those cops, as soon as I left, it was okay. My family wasn't mad at me, but I was still mad. And I wonder if that happens to you. Forgiveness is hard. Last week we spoke about forgiveness a lot. We spoke about resolution, conflict resolution. Do you remember that? And there's two kinds of conflict resolution that Jesus tackled. He talked about resolution through punishment, like the Romans when they crucified him for speaking out of line. He talked about resolution through healing, like what he did to almost everyone that he met, and what we're called to do. In today's scripture that we read, Jesus doubles down on forgiveness. And this is the story. Peter comes to Jesus, and he says, hey, your story about forgiveness, it's great, but like how much do you want me to do it? Like 7 is a good, round number, right? 7 times, does that work for you? And Jesus is like, Peter, make it 70 times 7. Make it exponentially more than that. Peter, we can assume, still doesn't get it. And maybe Jesus looks at Peter, and Peter's sitting there. That's a lot, Jesus. And Jesus says, okay, check this out. I got a story for you. I'm going to make it make sense, okay? Once upon a time, there was a servant, and he worked for a king. Now, this servant was in debt to the king by 10,000 talents, is what the Bible says. 10,000 talents. 10,000 of almost anything is a lot of a thing, right? But we don't even know what a talent is. We have our own word for the word talent, and that's talent, and it means something different than what it meant to them then. A talent in 1st century Israel was 6,000 drachmas. Thank you. 6,000 drachmas. So now it makes sense, right? What is a drachma? A drachma is the average wage for a day's labor. 6,000 times 10,000. Mr. Accounting, how much is that?
A lot.
Like a lot. Thank you. 60 billion. The king calls his servant to his quarters. He's like, hey man, time to pay up. Where's my money? And the guy prostrates himself. He humiliates himself. King, I'm going to have it. I'm going to get it. Just have patience. Forgive me. I'm going to make it work somehow. Please have patience. The king was prepared to throw this man in prison, sell his family, his spouse and his children, and all of his belongings for this, to recoup some of the money. To put this in perspective, if this person was sold into prison to do day labor to pay off this debt, it would have taken him 193,000 years if he worked every day to pay off this massive debt. When Jesus says 10,000 talents, he might as well be saying, Peter, it was $1 bazillion. An amount that is so large, it cannot ever possibly be paid off in any lifetime. For thousands of generations, your family would have to pay this off. Ultimate condemnation. There was nothing this man could do to even come close to making a little dent into his debt to the king. But he tried, he pled his case. The worst he could say is no, I guess. But the king doesn't say no. The king says, you know what? Okay. Forget it. Forget the debt. You're fine. I forgive you. It's okay. Go on your way. That's dramatic. That's dramatic not just because it's a big debt, but because the people who were listening to the story when it was first read knew that this was something that didn't happen. Gentile kings in Israel and vassals to the empire would regularly throw their subjects into prison and make them slaves out of debt. Debt slavery. It was normal. It was the way we do things. And kings can't give an inch in mercy lest everyone starts demanding it. That's how you get an insurrection. But this king takes a step back and does something totally different. I forgive you. Get out of here. What does this servant do? He finds another servant that is in debt to him. So this servant finds a servant that owes him 100 drachmas. We know a drachma is 1 day of work. So this is about 3.5, 4 months or so of wages. 3.5, 4 months. $20,000, $10,000, somewhere around there, right? A significant amount of money, but not $1 bazillion. It's doable. It's doable over time. It can happen. But this guy hasn't paid up. So what does this first servant do after he was just forgiven his debt? Violence. He chokes him, chokes the man, gives him a beating. Where's my money? Where is my money? And so this servant, who's getting beat up, tries to do the same thing that this first servant did to the king. And he gets on his knees, forgive me, please, I'm so sorry. I'm going to make it work. I'm going to pay you back. And we know that this servant probably can do that. That's an amount of money you can pay back. And what does the first servant do? He throws him in prison, sells his family, all his belongings. The punishment that was supposed to be for him, he now shifts over to the other servant. Right? That sucks. So, the other servants hear about this. Maybe they're whispering like, do you owe that guy money? That's not good. Hey, did you see what this guy did to our friend after what the king did? That's messed up. So they go and they approach the king like, hey, king, so a little bit of news. You remember Phil, who you forgave, right? Yeah, so he's being a real jerk. Like he's just acting a clown right now, and he threw Eric into prison over 100 drachmas. And maybe you should do something about that. I don't know. I'm not a king. You are, so do something, right? So the king calls his servant and says, "What the hell, man? What are you doing? After I forgave you, you can't even forgive 100 drachmas?" He's like, "That's not okay. You know what? You're going to prison." And he puts the guy into prison, shuts him out, and he loses everything. And then Jesus finishes the story, turns to Peter, maybe he's eating a bag of chips, and he's like, "Yeah, so that's what God's going to do to you if you don't forgive people." So there you have it, Peter. Do you get it? Now this story is weird to me because Jesus is preaching forgiveness. 70 times 7. Exponentially more than you would ever expect to forgive. And this king, who we assume represents God, Can't forgive twice? Well, that's strange. Is this king even God? Well, yes, this king does represent God, but also no, because this king represents the reality that these people suffer. The reality of that at a drop of a hat, you could go to prison for something outside of your control. This king, in his actions, represents God's forgiveness, but in his condemnation, represents the real consequences of living life in the world at this time. So how do we interpret that? Forgiveness. Just like in their society, it meant a certain thing, a talent, a drachma, debt slavery. That's not what it means to us anymore. And what it can mean to us now is different than what it meant even 50, 60 years ago. Consider this. God forgives us for all of everything that we've ever done wrong. 10,000 talents God forgives us. 10,000 talents. Everything, every lie we've ever spoken, every mistruth, every pain we've ever dealt. God forgives us for that. And who is it that we beat down over something as measly as 100 drachmas? In Arizona, it was me. I beat down me. I couldn't forgive myself, even after paying the $600. Even after my family told me it was fine. Even after I knew already God really doesn't care about this. I was putting all 10,000 drachmas on myself, even though it was forgiven already. This story has always been used to demonstrate how we should treat each other. And in Sunday school this morning, we were talking about how important love is to ourselves as well. If we want to get really good at forgiving and follow God's path, follow his lead in forgiveness, it has to start with us. We have to learn to forgive ourselves. And that doesn't mean pushing off responsibility. I can't say, well, yeah, I ran a stop sign and I'm not going to pay it though because I forgive myself. So God's got me. That's not what it means. We're still responsible for addressing the wrongs we do, but we don't need to sit at night in bed and think about all of the sins and how bad we are, because we're not. We have that forgiveness of God. But what difference does it make if we ourselves can't forgive? The man in our story went to prison anyway. He was forgiven and went to prison anyway because he couldn't forgive, not because of his debt. He didn't go into debt slavery. He did wrong to his fellow person. And when we do wrong to ourselves, it can feel as if we have no forgiveness from God at all. If we really want to be in community and in communion with our neighbor and with God, it has to start within. If we love ourselves, it is easier to love our neighbor. If we can see the inherent good in our souls, it is easier to see the inherent good in those we don't even like, those who we might have debt with. 100 drachmas might be something small. It might be a rumor. It might be gossip. It might be cheating, stealing. Can we forgive that in ourselves? I hope so.